Yeah, good evening, guys. The name is Malik again, and I've come to share a few things about and bring some insights about what we call the national budget. So, remember, every citizen out there, you are advised and politely asked to follow these issues concerning the national budget. Usually, it's around this period in June that the final preparations are made for the reading of the budget. And the budget usually entails the projected incomes and expenditures of the government, where it's going to get its revenue, and where it is expecting to put its like expenditure, or how it is going to use the revenue it has collected in the previous year, and how it's going to distribute these revenues to help out the people in the country and the running of the government. So in a nutshell, the national budget is a financial plan outlining the projected incomes or the projected revenues for this case and projected expenditures of a country throughout a period of time, especially for this case, it's going to be a fiscal year. Usually, a fiscal year comes with two like years in it. You can see 2025, 2026, like for this case, and this means the budget is starting in 2025 and it is ending in 2026. It's done like that because a fiscal year is different from like an a calendar year. They are quite different. So a calendar year it only gives 1 year. For a fiscal year it brings two. And for our case here in Uganda, our fiscal year usually begins after the budget is read in June. Usually it is mid-June, around the 15th going forward until 15th of June, let's say in the next year. So that is why they usually use 2 years when they are explaining about or when they are detailing a fiscal year. So let that not confuse you. And there's a lot of figures which are thrown around respectively when they're reading the budget. Usually it is in percentages and large sums of money, usually, and points are thrown around. You can hear 5.8 billion, 2.8 billion, 4.1 trillion. So let the figures not confuse you. It's just like the way you would make a budget for your home and you allocate something like 100,000 Ugandan shillings will be for electricity. So uh, the figures and the points and the percentages in the reading of the budget should not confuse you. So I've come to give a little insight about the components of a national budget. So after seeing what a national budget is, like is a very good similarity like with the budget you can make for your own home or your own self. It's not an expenditure plan because an expenditure plan usually entails how you're going to spend your money, but it gives little focus on the incomes on how you're going to get the money you're going to spend. But the budget has components which I'm going to explain in a few minutes, and I hope you guys follow through because it's not that hard just because that there are figures which are involved and there are a lot of MDAs or departments and ministries and authorities which are going to be mentioned. So you have to keep on track. And usually there are bytes which are let out to give you like a uh, summary of the whole budget. But I'm going to give you the few components of a national budget. First of all, maybe in the next episode we'll discuss details like as concerning maybe you can use 2025 and 2024-2025 budget to elaborate more on how a budget looks like. Maybe you can debate a little on that so that you can get a proper picture. But I'll keep it very summarized for you, all of us to understand. So component number one of the budget. The budget usually has 7 components, But component number one should be and must be the revenues. In the revenues, the most important part of the revenue section is the taxes which are collected by the government. So in this case, it's going to be Uganda Revenue Authority or URA, how much it has accumulated over time, over a year, especially the last financial year, putting it out there for the people to understand how much taxes they collected from the people. These include import duties, these include export duties, these include things like pay as you earn, income tax, and all the other taxes which you know about. So those are taxes. Then there are non-tax revenues. Non-tax revenues include things like fees, penalties, uh, in case you break the law, the penalties you pay in court, um, things like grants which are given to the government from other agencies and international like development partners, sorry, things like dividends which are got from state-owned agencies and then or state-owned enterprises. For this case of Uganda, things like revenues from Uganda Airlines, things like that. Then there's borrowing, which is another section of the revenues, uh, especially now the budget, but I'll reach to that later. But borrowing, things like loans, um, uh, then the bonds for domestic revenue, for domestic, because there's two types of borrowing. There's borrowing which is from like foreign borrowing, and then there's borrowing which is a situation where they call it domestic borrowing or domestic debt, where the government sells out bonds, treasury bills, and then gets money from the people and then later on has to pay back. So it's kind of a loan, like usually banks are the ones who buy these loans and other wealthy individuals or people who are interested in that business. So when the situation comes up, this is where I'm going to get a little technical, but it's not that hard. A situation has to come up where a government, like a budget is of two types. The first type is a deficit budget. The second type is a surplus budget, and then the third type is a balanced budget. The surplus budget is a situation where the government revenues exceed the government expenditures in that particular period. But the way you might come up with you've been paid a salary and you're making your expenditure plan or like your home budget, and you realize that your expenses you're going to be having in that particular period, let's say a month, are lower than your income. That means you have a surplus. That puts you in a very good financial position. The other position is a deficit budget. So this is the same case with the surplus budget for a national budget. So the revenues will exceed the expenditures. So in the other issue or the other side of the coin is a deficit budget. So deficit budget is a situation where the government is planning to spend more than it is earning in revenues. So that creates a deficit or a minus or some expenditures which are not catered for by the revenues which the government gets. So in order to like fill that gap, which is the deficit in this case, the government has to borrow, and this is called a deficit budget. So in that whole situation, that's the deficit financing. That's where the government gets loans and from the public, which is its own nationals or in the national boundaries, is present, or loans from outside. It can go to countries like China, it can go to organizations like the World Bank, organizations like the IMF, the Africa Development Bank, things like that. So that is the part of the revenue. That is component number one. Component number two is expenditures, where the government is going to be uh, putting that money where the money it has collected over the time through loans or through taxes or through the like grants and everything. But the revenue part is done, so now we're in the expenditures. So this is what we call expenditure number one is the operating expenses or current expenses. In this case of Uganda uses a certain term. But let's first take it. The name I've forgotten. It's called. They use recurrent expenditures. So they these are expenditures which are recurring in every financial year. For this case, things like government salaries. Uh, Remember, they are MDAs. MDAs are ministries, departments, and authorities, and these are the systems which the central government uses to run the country. So things like human resource, things like rent, have to be paid for. So that's why the government salaries come in. That's where things like pensions come in. That's where things like rent for buildings which the government doesn't own but uses for operation come in. So those are recurrent or current operating expenses. Then there are capital expenses, things which are like investments in things like infrastructure, especially infrastructure including roads, building schools, building hospitals, building LC, like operation um, stations, government offices, things like that. All those fall in capital expenses. Then there's another one which is like the other expenses, social programs, things like Operation Wealth Creation, Operation Emioga, things like PDM, that one. All those are social programs which take money and are supposed to be budgeted for in the as expenses. Then there's defense and security, and then there's debt servicing. Remember, debt servicing is a situation where you have to pay back a debt which you took some time back. So, in the process of either paying the interest, which is debt servicing, or paying the whole section of or part of the debt or the loan you acquired some time back is called debt servicing. That is also an expense. So those are the things you have to look out mostly out for when the budget is being read. And the other very important issue you should put in mind when the budget is being read is the issue of the economic goals. Usually they are stated out in by the Minister of Finance. They're not usually debated on because it's usually the finance part which is debated on in Parliament before the budget is read and approved. Remember, the budget is approved by the Parliament, but it is presented by the executive. That's why it is the duty of the minister to bring it in. But in the economic goals, things like economic growth, like stimulating jobs and industry, things like tackling inflation rates, reduction of unemployment, and income distribution are all debated about in the budget. And the plans the government has to streamline the economic condition in the country. So the other issue is sectoral allocations. This is the most interesting part because in this sector, apart from the revenues, expenditures, and the economic goals, the government comes in with something like a detailed table where it's going to be like the health sector is taking this percentage of the budget. Defense is taking this percentage. Uh, Agriculture is taking this percentage of the budget. So that is something which you should um, look out to also when the budget is being read. Then the fiscal policy adjustments. Usually the minister talks about them, new taxes which have been introduced, new subsidies, taxes which have been waived away. They also put in consideration when the budget is being read. And the final part of the budget you should look out to and really put a keen eye on is the contingencies. The contingencies usually are catered for by the Ministry of Disaster and Preparedness under the Office of the Prime Minister. These are monies which are reserved and put aside for things like natural disasters, uh, disease outbreaks, which are very serious, and the government might require to get money like to finance things like relocation of people or putting in place, sorry, things like mass immunizations, things which are not like foreseen when the budget is being read. It's like a miscellaneous part of a ceremonial budget. So, but it's put aside for things like this, just in case they happen. So those are the seven things which people should look around to. The other one which I talked about, maybe which I didn't list out, is the surplus and deficit, and then the balanced budget. So yeah, for Uganda's case, it is usually a deficit budget. Unfortunately, we are not yet in a level where we are priding ourselves in a balanced or a surplus budget. But I explained that in the minutes, like the preceding minutes. But a balanced budget, now which I never talked about, is a situation where the government is receiving the revenues which are perfectly like being taken away or being spent in the expenditure side. That means the expenditures and the revenues are are equal. So bringing us to the situation where it is balanced. But I hope and that the next video I'm going to make, I'm going to give a summary of the 2024-2025 budget, and I'll give a summarized outlook on how um, the other budget was allocated to give us a proper insight of how exactly the budgeting works and how much is going to be allocated, how much was allocated in this year, which we are finishing, and it gives us an insight of how the 2025-2026 budget is going to look like and what we should look out for. So, thank you for listening in. Uh, have a nice time.